So in this unit, we're going to discuss how to assess change direction mechanics in an injured athlete. It's obviously important, again, similar to running analysis, to appreciate the stage of rehabilitation, how much force and load can the injured tissue tolerate in order to avoid or minimize the risk of second injury. In terms of change direction mechanics, that intensity of the exercise will be dictated by how fast or how much speed they take into the change direction, but also the acuteness of the angle. So it's less demanding to take a 45-degree sidestep than it is to take a 90-degree or a 180-degree change direction where you have to completely decelerate and re-accelerate back in the direction of travel. So very often we can introduce the more acute angles or the simpler angles at the earlier stages of rehab and save the more complicated or more demanding decelerative activities until later on in rehabilitation. Again, we want to decide, do we want to assess performance or biomechanics? Are you interested in how quickly they execute the turn? Or are you interested in the mechanics they use to decelerate and re-accelerate, which from an injury prevention and a rehabilitation point of view is probably one of the more important factors. One factor also worth considering is the components of planned and unplanned change direction. So you can carry out a movement with great mechanics when you know what movement you're going to carry out, but when you have to react and be agile in response to an external stimulus, as they will be when they return to the field of play, you can very often end up with very, very different movement strategies. So from an assessment point of view and a rehabilitation point of view, we probably want to assess and intervene on both. So what stages of change direction do we want to analyze? Well, we're interested very much in their approach speed, how fast they are, how confident they are, entering into that change direction maneuver, and their strategy to decelerate. How much did they use the penultimate step to decelerate, or how many steps they take in the lead up to the change direction to try and slow themselves down before they step off. During the decelerative part of the stance phase, how do they control their trunk movement, their knee movement, not only in the frontal plane, but also in the sagittal plane, as we talked about in relation to patellar tendon load, and also in relation to ankle dorsiflexion in particular. And during the push-off, how aggressive are they in pushing off as they redirect? And are they successful in going back in the shortest possible route possible, or they end up taking a U-turn? So each of those components of the approach, the deceleration and the re-acceleration or push-off are incredibly important. As we watch this video here, we'll appreciate the fantastic athleticism to decelerate and to re-accelerate. Their ability of these athletes to keep their center of mass within their base of support at all time, how efficiently that allows them to change direction, but how it also influences the reduced susceptibility to overload at the knee, hip and ankle. In particular, the last part, not only are they able to change direction, but that peripheral vision and that agility, that ability to react to external stimulus is also incredibly important. In relation to the assessment of multi-plane or multi-segment movement, obviously 3D biomechanical analysis is the gold standard, and that's what we would use in day-to-day practice here in Dublin. However, not everyone has that facility available to them. So we need to appreciate what factors and what methods we're going to use in order to assess change direction in our own clinical practice or our own sporting setting. So if we take a 180-degree cut between two cones, a set distance apart of 5 meters, and ask the athlete to maximally change direction, looking at how neutral their foot position is, how much trunk side flexion, hip adduction there is, and how quickly and aggressively they redirect towards the direction of intended travel. If we compare that to the contralateral side and look at how do they decelerate one side compared to the other, how many bites of the cherry does it take in order to decelerate, and the role of their trunk position and hip and knee and ankle position as they decelerate and as they push off. So again, to break this change direction down, you can very clearly see the side-to-side differences. We can see that in his approach, he begins to decelerate much quicker or much closer to the cone. We can see as he lands, the trunk rotation towards the stance leg in the knee valgus. And we can see he's much less aggressive during the push-off than he was on the contralateral side. My colleague Neil Welch has looked at the factors that influence change direction performance during a variety of cuts, in particular in relation to a 70-degree change direction angle and a 45-degree sidestep. And he found that the faster change direction times in the 110-degree cut were those that leaned in the direction of travel more. So the more you lean towards the stance leg, the slower you're going to be, but also that's going to influence the biomechanics throughout the kinetic chain. Those at 110 and 45 were much more efficient at lowering their center of mass, had shorter ground contact times, so really aggressive in terms of resisting that lateral movement and pushing off as intensely as possible through the hip and through the knee extensors. So to summarize change direction analysis, the approach speed is very important, that ability to lower your center of mass. that ability to decelerate, absorb those eccentric forces, and the movement strategy we use not only at the trunk, but at the hip, knee, and ankle, and how that influences muscle and tendon load in the lower limb. And have as short a push-off phase as possible, short ground contact time, and aggressively producing lateral forces to get the fastest change direction possible.